Yo, peace. Yo, peace. Share my screen real quick. Boom. There we go. So the name of this bill is David Ruggles and the Committee of Vigilance. Go back. Let me get off that. So this right here, the David Ruggles Center. That's where I'm gonna be getting the information from. Who was David Ruggles? He was an abolitionist, fought for the freedom of Black people and the fugitive slaves who ran away. So it says David Ruggles was an African-American abolitionist, writer, publisher, and hydropathic practitioner who was a courageous voice for Black freedom. He assisted hundreds escaping slavery and mentored abolitionist luminaries Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, and William Cooper Neal. Let me scroll down real quick. I just want to get to the anti-slavery. So by 1827, Ruggles was in New York working as a miner. In 1828, he opened a grocery store. So you have in 1828 a Black man owning the first grocery store, the first free Black man owning the grocery store in 1828. By the early 1830s, Ruggles became involved in the growing anti-slavery movement in New York, advocating for the practical abolitionism, arguing that abolitionists should not just philosophize about the day slavery would end, but strive to help all victims of human bondage. He also advocated for the civil disobedience and self-defense. Ruggles' grocery store shop at 1 Cortlandt Street was also a circulating library, reading room for African Americans who were denied access to the New York public libraries. So when you hear people say who wasn't able to read, write, and etc., you see now that David Ruggles not only started the first grocery store, but also the first African American to have a bookstore. His was, I guess they meant to say he, but it say his. He was the nation's first Black-owned bookstore, and then Ruggles sold anti-slavery publications until it was destroyed by the mob in 1833. The Emancipator and Abolitionist Weekly appointed him as an agent to canvass for the subscribers throughout the mid-Atlantic states. By 1834, now on Lispenard Street, Ruggles also regularly published dozens of articles and pamphlets for newspapers throughout the Northeast between 1838 and 1841. He wrote, printed, and published the first journal edited by African American, the Mirror of Liberty. David Ruggles was a visible conductor on the Underground Railroad. He helped at least 600 people to freedom, including Frederick Douglass. Ruggles also a founder of the New York Vigilance Committee, the Committee of Vigilance, which fought against the practice of kidnapping free Blacks in New York, as well as fugitive African Americans and illegally selling them into slavery in the South. So let me pull this up. I got another tab, as you can see, about, let me scroll up, David Ruggles Committee of Vigilance. Let me scroll down real quick. So, facing such bleak circumstances, Ruggles and his colleagues dedicated themselves to bringing change throughout direct actions. By the early 1830s, Ruggles was a key member in the circle of activists based on cities, Black church organizations, and in the Black self-help organizations like the New York African Society for Mutual Aid. So we can pull it up. That's for the people who don't know what that is. It was started by Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. Free Society. Let's pull up a Wikipedia. The Free African Society, founded in 1787, was a benevolent organization that held religious service and provided mutual aid for free Africans and their descendants in Philadelphia. The society was formed by Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. It was the first Black religious institution in the city, led to the establishment of the first independent Black church in the United States. So I'm just giving you a little concise brief of what that is. So he identified strongly with William Lloyd Garrison, American Anti-Slavery Society, which called for the interracial action to the end American slavery immediately. But while Garrison advocated a course of nonviolence, Ruggles felt differently. He called for the practical abolition, meaning that Black and white abolitionists confront slave owners and their allies forcefully, even in the streets of New York, whether necessarily requires let that remedy be applied. He wrote in 1836. So you see in 1836, you got people writing. So I want to make it clear that we were reading and writing in the 17 and the 1800s. So don't be duped by the people who saying that we couldn't read and write. This is a free man. So come what may, anything better than slavery. So you see, he ready to go to war for the freedom of the people. Ruggles' solution was the Committee of the Committee of Vigilance, a group of Black and white New York anti-slave activists he helped create in Manhattan in 1835. So you see, we got institutions created in 1835 as well as businesses. The committee's goal was to protect unoffended, defenseless, and endangered persons of color by securing the rights as far as practicable. Ruggles was the committee secretary and lead actor in New York, as the nation's major seaport gave him plenty of opportunities to put theory into practice. In December 1836, for example, after the Portuguese slave ship, the Brilliantine, I may be butchering that word, arrived in the harbor with 5 enslaved Africans aboard. Several men connected to Ruggles sprang into action. On Christmas Eve, they stormed the Brilliantine and escaped with 2 enslaved men. When the sailor tried to stop them, one of the gang cocked a pistol at him and threatened to blow his brains out. The committee also used direct confrontation to fight for the Southern slaves whose master brought them to New York, but openly ignored 9-month limit. Enslaved servants, both men and women, fought to use the law to escape and argue for their freedom. Let me run that back. Enslaved servants, both men and women, fought to use the law to escape or argue for their freedom. So it's this stuff that I see on the internet where you have our people saying that we are not our ancestors, basically stating that our ancestors just laid down and let these people do whatever it was they wanted to do to them. No, that didn't happen. So I feel like those people just need a brief understanding of the history that's out there for us and to know what actually took place. So we fought for our freedom. We freed ourselves. Ruggles and his allies confronted slave owners face to face to try to force emancipation. The meetings sometimes became shouting and shoving matches. In one case in 1838, an enraged Virginian John P. Dorg and Ruggles thrown in jail after he tried to negotiate freedom of Thomas Hughes, a slave of Dorg's, who had run away in New York with several $1,000s of his master's money. Despite the setback, the abolitionists eventually won Hughes' freedom after the master tried to sell him in the Deep South. But most important to the committee was their crusade against the kidnappers who pose a threat to every Black resident in New York City. Paid agents and bounty hunters roamed the city seeking to capture runaways. And you can look up this group. It's a white gang. It was called the Black Birders. I don't think it was in this article. I mean, I don't think it's in this article, but the Black Birders, you can let me pull that up too, just for people to have an idea. Blackbird. Let me see. Okay, here we go. Blackbirding involved the coercion of people and deception of kidnapping to work as slaves or poorly paid laborers in the countries distant to the native land. The term has been most commonly applied on large scale of taking of people in indigenous numerous islands, Pacific Oceans during the 19th, 20th century. The Blackbirds were people called the Kanakis, some seas that were taken from the place such as Solomon Islands. Oh, I don't think this is the right one. Okay, here we go, right here. This is just a definition, but I was looking for a wiki page, but a person or vessel involved in the capture or transportation of slaves. But you had this gang in New York, and those people was doing that stuff. So city kidnapping club, Ruggles called them, went even further. The city officials pounced on a legally free Black New Yorkers, had dragged them from the South for sale and famously assertion that they were runaways. Children as young as 9 years old, John Welch, lured from the Mulberry Street home, were caught up in the darknet and were sometimes shipped hundreds of miles away before their parents could plead for their return. With funds provided by local white abolitionists and by that's New York, one of the 100 Black New Yorkers who raised cash from hundreds more. The Committee of Vigilance hired skilled lawyers. We hired lawyers in this time in the 1800s to help captives held in jails or already deported in the South. So here you have a people dedicated and putting their lives on the line to free people who are fugitives, people who are freemen, being kidnapped, sent to jail, sent to the South, and you have the Vigilance Committee knowing about what's going on, taking these people to court and granting people their freedom. Although the city's judges many of them well-connected Democrats sometimes refused to cooperate. By 1838, Ruggles and his committee had saved a reported 522 individuals from slavery. The committee counted on the influence of the support of its white members, but Black men and women were the troops on the ground, keeping an eye on the potential kidnappers and mobilizing the city's African Americans community assist Ruggles. Ruggles also put together a network of safe houses. This is very important right here. Ruggles also put together a network, of safe houses and churches across the Northeast that became stops on the Underground Railroad to freedom. So this man had places for the runaways to seek shelter, get food, and rest while running to the free state to be granted freedom. By 1840, the New York City Committee of Vigilance had inspired a creation in similar groups in Philadelphia, uh, Albany, Boston, Rochester, Cleveland, Detroit, and elsewhere, all bent on helping African Americans flee from and resist slavery, which is Pan-Africanism. The Committee of Vigilance was largely forgotten as historians in later decades forced on the efforts of white abolitionists, singled out just a few Black anti-slavery activists, such as Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, for attention. For the most Black New Yorkers and the white allies who struggled later generations against racism, segregation, and discrimination, New York City, as well as in the South, the name David Ruggles meant nothing. Yet their efforts, these later activists unknowingly echoed the deviance in the leader of the New York City the Committee of Vigilance, who had once proclaimed, "I have tried to do my duty and mean still to preserve, preserve until the last feather shall be broken and the last sigh heard from the lips of a slave." So you have a man who dedicated his life for the freedom of his people, started businesses. You have the first bookstore, grocery store, and he also printed a magazine. But this is just a build I wanted to put out there for the people who can to see what this brother did and what he put his life on the line for. It's my first time streaming with this stuff. Oh, stop sharing.